Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to LTV's Cityscope, the show that brings you, yes, you, information about people, events, things that are happening in and around the city of Leominster, which, of course, for you watching online, Leominster is in central Massachusetts, north central Massachusetts, the place that gets the most snow amount totals, right here. Last night, 20 inches. But anyway, I digress. Today, we have a wonderful guest with us. His name is Mr. Charley Valera, and he's a pilot and a realtor and an author. And he has authored a book called My Father's War, Memories from Our Honored World War II Veterans. Charley, welcome to Cityscope.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So, this book has been getting wonderful accolades from all over New England, all over the country.
Yeah.
What's it about? Let's start with that.
What it's about is World War II veterans and their lives, what it was like for them during the war, what they did kind of on a day-to-day basis, but also about their lives before the war. You know, did they go to high school? Did they graduate? And then were they enlisted versus being drafted? What did they do during the war? And then what was their life like afterwards? Now, I know there's a lot there, so I had to condense it down to 8,000 or 10,000 words. It was a little tricky, but that's really what the book is about. It's about a broad, painting with a broad brush of World War II veterans from all the branches in both theaters of war, so that we have a good idea, no matter what, maybe somebody in your family was in the Navy or maybe in the Marines, and at least you have an idea as to what their life was like, their daily life, if you don't have the luxury of being able to sit down with them.
What was it that gave you the inspiration to tackle this subject, to do this book?
The fact that, I guess, my dad was a World War II veteran, and we never get to hear any of his stories, so we assumed there weren't any. And he just downplayed it and barely ever spoke about it. Probably a dozen years after he passed away, I got a copy of his his military discharge papers.
Okay, right.
And when I got to review them, I found out that he actually had 11 campaigns. They shipped him everywhere. Normandy, the Ardennes Forest, which is Battle of the Bulge, Rome, Po Valley, Sicily, you name it, they stuffed the old man everywhere. And it really answered a lot of questions about what he was like. And I thought, geez, there must be other people out there that are my age that maybe didn't get the opportunity to sit with their parents, their father or their mother, and ask them, what was it like for you? What did you eat? How did you sleep? Were you involved in any battles? What was your life like during those impressionable years? So that, my father's war records were my inspiration.
So when a reader walks into a bookstore, picks up this book, what can they expect, when they start going through it and reading it? What are they going to find once they get in there?
Well, hopefully they're going to find the only place where they can get that kind of an assortment from, like I mentioned earlier, every branch, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, and what it was like for those soldiers, sailors, and airmen to go through day-to-day life. And hopefully it'll also inspire them to maybe go back and talk with somebody in their own family and find out what their lives were like. We're losing time.
You mentioned that your father did not voluntarily come out with a lot of this stuff. Why do you think a lot of these World War II vets just kept it to themselves, didn't talk to their families? I know the obvious answer is it was, a horrible experience, what they went through, but do you think there's more to it than that, or? Yeah,
I do. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that they were very humble. When they came home, nobody talked to them about it. I was just reading about one of the guys last night, Joe Caminello, and Joe had said to me, when we came home, nobody mentioned it. It was as if the war never happened. We were just supposed to come home, get a job, raise a family, and ignore the previous 4 years that he spent in the belly of a B-17 or a B-24. And so I think most of it was humble. I have been told by some of the veterans that they did bring it up. VFW, somewhere having a few drinks, they might talk amongst each other. The other reason is, again, I'm just paraphrasing, because we weren't there, we wouldn't understand. And unless you were there to see what it was really like, or to be that cold, or to be that hungry, or that scared, you'd never understand what it was like.
You've heard a lot of inspiring stories from a lot of these veterans. You know, at Leominster TV, we've been helping you document some of these interviews and broadcasting them. What are some of the most really inspiring stories that you may have heard?
You know, there are so many of them. There really is. The few that come to mind as we sit here, I think of Santo de Salvo. You know, Santo was in here. We interviewed him. Was he 5'1", 5'2", little guy, little hot-headed Sicilian that had had enough. He was in a foxhole. They were all pinned down, and he made the decision of his life without even, just in an instant. He got up, and with 6 or 8 grenades and a little machine gun that he had to take out a German enemy machine gun that was pinning everybody down. They couldn't retreat, they couldn't get up, they couldn't stick their heads up. Somebody had to do something. And, you know, he made that snap decision because, as he said, somebody had to do something. He said, we couldn't do anything. Someone had to. So I just did it. Now, he risked his life. He got a Distinguished Service Cross for that, as you know. But those are the kind of inspiring instances. You know, another one that comes to mind is Fern Frechette. And we had Fern in here. Wonderful guy. But the fact that he had helped liberate the worst concentration camps, death camps, actually, right? Auschwitz, Buchenwald. And then to come home and raise a family and try his best to put that behind him. You know, you and I mean, our internet goes out, right? Oh my God, how awful. So I guess those are a couple of the stories that I find pretty amazing.
You as an author and as a you know, an emotional feeling human being, hearing some of these stories, what really saddened you the most, or the opposite, uplifted you the most, you know, in some of these stories?
Yeah, you know, there's been many times talking with them that I felt as though, you know, the word pain is never anywhere in that book, because never anything they said. It might be in there if I put it in, but it was nothing that they said. And I found that inspiring. They never said, you know, it hurt, physically or emotionally. They said they were scared, but they never talked about pain. I found that to be pretty interesting. As far as what I got, you know, when you talk to some of these grown men and they choke up, they tear up, I feel really bad, and I don't want to continue my interview with them. It's like, no, I'm not going to bring you there. This isn't that kind of an interview. And I usually do it with video cameras. So I didn't want them to go into these rooms where they didn't want to go, because they've done a great job staying out of them for 70 years, and I didn't want to push them into it. So that's been that was the tough part.
That's interesting, because most interviewers will try to go to those places, try to get them to open up. But like you said, it must be so painful for them to relive some of these things that I can understand your hesitance to, you know, to bring them in that area. You just wanted to try to get some facts from them or some information about things they did, accomplishments that they did, you know, while they were in the service. But it's such a, I'm sure of a lot of them, and I've heard a lot of stories where they went through these horrific events, and they just had to, they were kids.
Yeah, you know, at 18, 19 years old, 20 years old, with that amount of responsibility and being around death as much as that often. It's not like it was a couple of weeks or a 6-month, you know, you're going to be over here for 6 months or a year. For 3 years, 4 years. My father was actually in World War II, or he was in the military longer than the United States was involved in World War II. And a lot of the guys were. You know, they joined early and they stayed late. You know, the hitch was 4 years and 6 months, or the end of the war plus 6 months, whatever the government felt like. And of course, they could change the rules as they did oftentimes in the middle of it. But we'll never know what it was like to be there. The little black and white clips don't quite cut it. It's kind of like being around an angry skunk, you know? You can see pictures of it, but until you're right there 3 feet away, then you kind of get the full feel of it all.
What were some of the major challenges you had in putting this book together? Was it finding people willing to talk? You know, some of these gentlemen, most of them are all in their 90s or late 80s, right? What was your biggest challenge?
There was a lot of challenges. Certainly finding the right veterans, and then the ones that could remember a story. I can remember talking to one guy and saying, "So you were in World War II?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, what did you do?" And he said, "I was a pilot." Of course, I was all excited. "Well, where did you fly?" He said, "I don't remember." That was pretty heartbreaking. And I would travel throughout the state with my little camera and a notepad and interview everybody I could to see which stories I could get enough of that would fit into my vision of this book, of having a little bit from everybody. And I wanted it firsthand. I didn't want to write what I thought I heard, or, this is how, just another history book. I wasn't into doing that.
I'm sure a lot of them may have said, "I'm not interested in doing that." How did you coax them into doing these interviews and opening up after all these years,
Yeah, 10 years ago, I don't think I could have gotten away with this. And of course, 5 years from now, we know probably wouldn't be possible. So I think that for the most part, this was, it's been a long road for them. And the road is a little bit shorter now. So I think they saw this as an opportunity, and they've been very grateful. But at first, it was a little tricky. It was definitely a little tricky to let them understand. Al Pernard would look at me and say, "Did you ever do this before?" And he, and Santo de Salva, I go over to Santo's, all he talked about was the food. They would a lot of them stonewalled me at first.
Right.
But I went back 4, 5, 6 times to get the stories right, or call them many times. But more often than not, instead of a phone call, I'd just make an appointment to go and see them again.
Have you shared, especially these video interviews that we've been doing, have you shared them with the veterans? And also, what is their response? What has been their response to your work, your book, and or the video interviews or whatever?
LTV has done a fantastic, amazing job with these interviews, and they love them. They are so grateful. And, unfortunately, some of the guys that have been in here are no longer with us. And their families love them. They really are appreciative. And again, you guys really made it all happen. I just brought the guys in and chatted with them like I'm chatting with you. It was that easy.
Right.
Because I know them pretty well at this point. But the families were thrilled. The guys seemed to be very happy with the outcome. I don't think anybody, I'm sure nobody has said anything negative about the videos. And actually, they've gone out quite a ways, because I have friends in various parts of the country that I've sent it out to as well. And
So the book has been received very well, especially from veterans and everybody that has parents that lived through that, that went through that whole experience or went through the experience themselves. What can you learn from these veterans, in terms of what they talked about in their interviews?
There were some commonalities. You can learn why they were called the greatest generation, but you're not going to find it unless you're open to it. There were certain things that came out, like God. They all believed in God. They all felt as though there was going to be a higher power somewhere that was going to get them off that hell on earth that they were living through. And that was a common thread that I heard. Maybe it's downplayed today, but back then, I have a Bible that I recently received, and it's dated 1942. It's only this big, and it was the one that the soldiers were all given when they went to war. And of course, if you were Jewish, you got a different one, and everybody got what they wanted. And there was a lot of mass. They went to mass before a lot of battles. It was a pretty common occurrence. Another thing that stood out to me was how humble they were. And I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but they were very humble. They valued their friendships. a handshake was a big deal. You gave your word, it was a big deal. That seems to be things that are lost in today's world. Everyone has a lawyer. They didn't do that back then.
I was amazed with the book and with the interviews, how well some of these gentlemen remembered really particular items from 70, how many years it's been, from way back then. How can they possibly remember all those details? Were you amazed at that too? Or?
Absolutely. That was something that really drew me into it. The first person I interviewed was Bill Purple, and he has, like the rest of them, an amazing memory. He'll tell you what date, what time, what the mission was, what the route was, the heading, the altitude, the temperature, and they were all like that. And so, yeah, I found that to be absolutely amazing, and it really did draw me into it more, because you just don't went into that kind of. Those must have been so traumatic years that they were burned into their memories, even though they didn't bring them out and tell anybody. And then you and I are sitting with them, and it's like, you're kidding me? Wow. Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Absolutely amazing. What do you think these greatest generation veterans think about today? With like NFL players taking a knee during the national anthem and things like that. I mean, have you talked to any of them about this?
I have. And it's kind of sad, because although some of them are pretty upset with it, a lot of them had also said to me, but that's what we fought for. I went to war so you could have the freedom to do what you want. Because if we didn't, you wouldn't have that. You wouldn't be able to go from city to city, state to state. It'd be one big state, and you'd have to have your papers, just like they witnessed when they were in Europe. If you didn't have your papers, you weren't going anywhere. And, your passport or whatever. And so they said, that's what we fought for. So I may not like it, but that's the result of having a free country. I was a little surprised at that. I was hoping that they were going to say, those dirty rats, how dare they do that? And it wasn't like that. It was more of a, understanding.
What lessons do you think we can learn from hearing these interviews and reading these interviews with these veterans? What kind of lessons do you think that we can take away from this, that we can learn from them?
I think it's going to come back to believing in God, being humble, treating your friends properly, working as a team. You do that here really well. You have everybody here, and everyone works great together. Nothing happens individually. It's all a team effort. I can remember some of the stories about the guys when they'd come home. They'd help their friends build their houses, literally. Show up with a hammer and nails and build the houses. We couldn't even ask anybody to do that, let alone offer it. But back then it was pretty common. They also had a strong belief in the future. They felt as though that the future was going to be better. So there was a handful of things like that I think if we look a little bit harder, that maybe we can be, maybe the next generation could be the greatest generation, part two. But they do need to learn a little bit about the sacrifices that they made for the betterment of everybody, and not just, of course there was no social media.
Okay, we're getting near the end here, but your book is available in bookstores everywhere. If people want to contact you or get more information from you, they go to charleyvalera.com?
Yeah. That's my
spelled
website.
With an EY, folks, on Charlie.
Either way.
Right. Anyway.
IE or EY.
Does it both work?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, I had to do that. But I'd be happy to answer questions or whatever.
Great. Yeah.
It's been an absolute honor for me to be able to sit with these guys and get their stories, all firsthand.
It's been an eye-opener for us too. We really enjoyed it. We learned a lot from these gentlemen, meeting them in person. Amazing, amazing people. And unfortunately, we're losing them now per hour. Per day, we're losing. They're going to be gone
one every 3 minutes.
Yeah. Is that what the average is? It's very sad that we weren't able to get to every single one and hear all their stories. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
Yeah, just that if you have the opportunity, you really need to sit with somebody in your family, great grandfather, grandfather, and talk with them. Get their stories. Find out what it was like, because now they'll talk with you. You know, we did that event at Leominster High School. That was
Yes,
fantastic.
it was.
That was just so good. Those kids were thrilled. And to see these guys get a standing ovation, just, you know, perfect. That's
was.
what
It was.
they deserve it.
They deserve it, and I think they love getting out there too.
Yeah.
Some of them, anyway, love getting out there, and that's the great thing.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for doing this project, and thank you for coming on Cityscope today. And
Yeah.
we'll have to do it again at some other point. Thank you,
Okay,
Charlie.
thank you so much.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching Cityscope, and we'll catch you next time.